So, Amika, you're in DC, as in Washington, DC. Nothing is in poor taste. There you go. Glad to see I'm not the only one making jokes today. Okay, so we're going to take up probably most of this time talking about setting up a server. I've tried a whole range of different solutions for this, and I'm sure that others in the room who are running Gibbon have had similar experiences. Our school actually first started out with shared hosting, which worked for a short period of time until we started using the system more, and then even though the hosting was promised as unlimited capacity, eventually you work out there's a limit on MySQL connections or something like that. So we moved from that to a dedicated server where the operating system was run for us by a company, and then we just ran the software inside that. That on paper was a great server, but it kept hanging every Friday afternoon for a reason that I couldn't get to the bottom of, and that they believed was a Gibbon memory leak, which I spent a lot of time hunting for but could never find because it didn't exist. When we moved it to another server that we managed, it's been running flawlessly ever since. So for the last 3 years, we've been running it on Ubuntu's command line server version. And we're actually running at the moment on an HP ProLiant Generation 5 server, which is about 8 years old. It's got 10 gigs of RAM, a 4-core processor, like a Xeon processor, and with about 1,000 users, we're rarely over 5% of capacity for that. So it's hosted within one of our campuses. That reduces the latency, but it very rarely gets pushed beyond 10%, let's say, of capacity. Does anyone have anything to add in terms of particular servers that you've used, particular setups that have been successful or unsuccessful?
I run a VPS, and I can put multiple ones on that.
Okay.
It's quite powerful.
Okay, which company is that?
Vodien in Singapore.
Vodien?
Vodien.
Okay.
And that's another one as to where your server is. Doesn't really matter too much, does it? So the fact that mine's in Singapore, no one's going to
Yeah.
There's one exception to that, which is if you're on the mainland.
It would have been
Basically, you've got to host it within the mainland because, particularly Chongqing, it seems to be they've got too much, not enough filtering routers, so everything bottlenecks at the border, whether or not it's getting locked or not, and it's just very, very slow. So we will have to have a dedicated server.
Yeah, I mean, for certain schools as well, internet connections outside the school might be spotty, or even in some cases non-existent, or the bandwidth is very limited. So there are definitely strong arguments for running your own server.
You've also got to be quite careful, because I know one school, they run it on their own server, it's slower than if they run it on mine.
Yeah. So,
which is weird.
So certainly if you're running it on your own server, you're going to want to have some kind of knowledgeable and skillful sysadmin who knows the software stack that you're running, who's able to deal with problems and who's able to keep it secure. Security is always a concern, and confidentiality for all schools. We've had a few examples that I can share with you. So we used to allow SSH connections to our server from outside of school, and we did that because we had a secure certificate system that we believed was secure enough to manage that risk. But what we found eventually is that the server was being attacked by someone trying to brute force the password, which wouldn't have worked because it wasn't a password-based login system. But it did go to show that there are definitely people out there probing this specific system. With a different system running WordPress at a kindergarten, the kindergarten my kids go to, the server kept crashing every few days, and I couldn't work out what it was until eventually I sort of dug through the logs enough to find out that at specific times some Russian malicious actors were hitting it about 10,000 times a second with with a WordPress attack. So it's worth having people who can look at that kind of thing if you're going to host your own. Do keep questions coming on the sidebar if you want. I'll assume you can all hear me and you're all following along if there are no questions. In terms of the software that you run, the most standard configuration is Apache, MySQL, and PHP, AMP, AMP. So PHP you don't have a choice in because Gibbon is written in PHP, so you need a PHP-capable web server to process that. I mentioned in one of the previous sessions that MySQL is the only choice in Gibbon. When you do the installation, it's actually a no-choice choice. The field is filled in. You can use MariaDB as an alternative. That's being tested and works well, but that is because MariaDB is a MySQL fork. In terms of using other databases, we're saying one day it might be possible. The PDO database driver that we use in PHP supports 12 other database types. So at some point in the future that might be possible. But for now, PHP and MySQL are pretty much fixed. The A in that stack, the Apache, Apache is the, I don't know, the granddaddy of servers. Some people don't like it because it's big and old. There's an alternative you can use called Nginx, which I'll write in the sidebar if you haven't heard of it because the spelling's kind of funny. Nginx is much lighter than Apache and is supposed to get better use out of your hardware, more efficient use. I've heard some concerns about whether translation works in Nginx. So, I mean, I tend to stick with Apache just because I know it very well from years of using it. In terms of operating system, Gibbon should work on Windows, Linux, or Mac, or any other POSIX system like BSD. I don't recommend using it on Windows, just because I don't like Windows, sorry to say. I wouldn't recommend running it on Mac in production, just because you're going to be paying over the odds for hardware, and Apple don't make servers anymore. So for me, the best choice is Linux, and Ubuntu Linux seems like one of the more durable, up-to-date, secure, and flexible versions of Gibbon. So for any hosting that I do now, it is LAMP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, and it is on Ubuntu. My previous experiences were with CentOS, which is the open source version of Red Hat Linux, and that was the one I mentioned that had lots of hang-ups, so I haven't used that since. Going back to the question of having your own server, if you don't want a physical machine, then Amazon Web Services, AWS, their Elastic Cloud 2, EC2, I think is the name, virtualized server, like a VPS, but I guess your VPS, Andy, do they manage the OS for you? Or do you manage it? Okay, all right. So yeah, you get a blank virtual computer and you can install your own OS, and you can upgrade the size and control the costs as you need. Okay, so there's no questions coming up at the moment. Is anyone in the room interested in?
If you were to be buying a server, is it possible to run it on a server while hosting other stuff on the same server?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you were, what would be like a minimum spec you would think a server would need to be doing?
So when you're trying to work out what to have in a server, it comes down not to your total number of users, but your number of concurrent users. So as I mentioned, our 10 gigs of RAM Xeon 4-core 2.8 gigahertz, I think it is, runs at 5% for 1,000 users. Now, it's probably more like 1,500 users. But concurrently, on any given school day, any second, there's probably between no one and 30 people hitting that at the same time. which are quite small across both campuses. But that is an 8-year-old server, right? So it's not running solid state, it's an older processor. It does have RAID. I'm sure somewhere there'll be a calculator that you can use to work out roughly. If you were to find something that could calculate, say, WordPress concurrent users, Gibbon seems to me to be about 50% lighter than WordPress. Would you say that's fair?
1,500% lighter?
No, 50.
No, I would
Oh,
say
sorry, yeah, I
WordPress
got
is
you.
much
Okay,
heavier.
much more, okay. So in terms of the way that WordPress is structured, in the way that it assembles pages and the way that it loads up lots of things, there you go. So somewhere between 50% and 1,500% lighter than WordPress.
If your server can run WordPress, you're pretty set.
Okay, there you go. And it's something that we are conscious of as we develop new versions, and that was one of the things we were taking a different direction with the object-oriented work, but we backed off that because the levels of abstraction ran so deep that it was just hammering the server. How many people are at your school? How many?
400 students.
Okay.
So 100 staff, parents, probably 1,050.
Okay.
1,200.
So I'd guess in that size school, if you were to buy a good PC, if you wanted to do it cheap, a good PC with say a solid state,
Yeah.
or solid state RAID if you can. Obviously that doesn't give you the redundancy and the quality to run it year after year after year.
Yeah.
You're probably looking at 4 years instead of 8 years. RAID is huge for me on the server side. So if you're not familiar, RAID is a redundant array of inexpensive disks. Ray can tell you a great story about RAID, but he's not going to, because he's not going to embarrass me here.
You went RAID 0, didn't you?
No. I
Oh, you
embarrassing
did.
story about me, right? With RAID, if you choose the right RAID level, like RAID 1 or RAID 5, you can have the failure of one hard drive out of a set of 3 hard drives without the server stopping working or losing any data. And so we actually had this happen this week at our school. One of our 3 disks went from the normal green light, everything's okay, to the red light. If you only had one server and it went down, that would be go to backup, rebuild the whole system, reinstall the operating system, all the rest. As is not hot swappable, so we had to shut the server down, take the drive out, plug in a new drive, turn it back on, but beyond that we didn't have to do anything. The 2 drives remaining had all the data between them, copied it over, and after about an hour the system came up as per normal. So RAID is definitely worth looking into. But make sure you back it up. RAID isn't a backup. You can't go back in time if there's a mistake that's been made. It just gives you resilient redundancy in the here and now.
A lot of the PHP settings and MySQL settings can go a long way to keeping a smooth system running. There's a lot of MySQL defaults that can be adjusted for the number of users, number of queries, all that stuff.
Yeah. And you can also play around with, I can't remember what they're called in Apache, there's M2, is it M2M versus worker? There's different ways of threading.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so there's definitely quite a lot you can tune in Apache to get more out of your server.
One of these days I'll see if Gibbon runs on Hip Hop Virtual Machine.
Is that a thing?
That's Facebook's PHP. engine.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Okay. I was thinking more Dr. Dre, but that's Apple. So, okay. In terms of if you were to buy your hardware and have it in school, your best bet. Or the way I would normally do it would be to get Ubuntu Linux on some kind of media, install the operating system, and then start installing the software stack. Usually Apache first, test if it's working.
There's good videos for this.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got it running on a virtual box
Yeah,
on the laptop.
cool. Okay.
And maybe they're LTS or something.
Sorry,
The long-term
LTS?
support,
Yeah. So I'll keep going with this for people who are listening. When you use Ubuntu, using the LTS, the long-term support version, is recommended for servers. It gives you 5 years without having to worry about making a jump in your server stack, you can get security and stability updates for 5 years. So usually you try and get Apache running, and if that's serving up web pages, then you would install PHP. And again, if you were to search for Ubuntu install Apache PHP, or even a Ubuntu install LAMP, there's tons of tutorials online, videos, texts will walk you through it. Once you've got PHP running, you can then install MySQL and see if PHP will talk to MySQL. You'd have to have the PDO drivers installed for PHP, which I think is default in a lot of Linux versions. And then it's a matter of, like we looked at in session 2, downloading and installing, getting Gibbon in there. There's a post-installation guide on the Gibbon support website, so if you're under administrators here, there's some recommended settings. So it's installing Gibbon, post-install and server config. These are some things that will just help you with security and reliability and just making sure things run as well as you can. The amount of time you want to invest in security depends on how paranoid you are and how much trouble you'll get into if something goes wrong on that front. We made sure right from the outset to use HTTPS. Actually, sorry, that's not true. We used HTTP without the S for a while, but then we switched to HTTPS when we set up our current server. So that means that passwords are protected going back and forward over the internet. We then made sure to limit SSH access after that attempted attack that I mentioned. So SSH is only available on one campus, and if you need to SSH into the machine, if you're not familiar with SSH, it's a secure shell. It's a way that you can access your machine for administrative tasks remotely. So we limited that to just within our campus, and if I want to do that from anywhere else, I have to VPN into the campus first in order to get into SSH. And then we disabled regular FTP and forced FTP over SSH, and ensured that SSH, you couldn't log in with a password. You needed a certificate that had to be unlocked with a key. So just putting in more barriers to getting into the server. You can limit where your MySQL connections can come from and all sorts of other things as well. Okay, I think, again, pending any questions that people might have at this point, that's probably as much as I'll say on setting up a server. Is there anything final to add, or?
There is a script called auto MySQL backup that's really handy that you can run that backs up your database hourly, weekly, monthly, and it stores it on your local server, but it's still, if you need to roll back to hours worth of data.
That is good to know. Has anyone found a reliable way to get that onto another server? I've been trying to look if I can back up to Google Drive, but I haven't managed that yet. I know you could use rsync.
Yeah.
This is probably the easiest way.
You could put rsync on a cron job.
Yeah. So obviously, if you only have one backup and that backup is attached to your machine and your machine is attacked, then your backup can be attacked too. So you might want to consider using rotational backups where one backup lives offline, or backing up using something like rsync to a remote machine, so that if someone attacks one machine, they can't necessarily get to the other machine, although your cron job that's running rsync probably has the credentials to get into the other server, so someone digging around could, in theory, follow that path.
Yeah.
Yeah. So an offline backup to me is always worthwhile, preferably an offline backup in a different building, somewhere, country, tectonic plate, far away from the coast, in a mountain. Yeah. Every so often I take a backup and I store it in an online cloud-based system that I'm not going to name, just so that if everything was to go terribly wrong, at least I can go back to that. It might be a month old or something, but at the very worst, I've got that.
How big is the average backup? How big is the database?
Okay, it's a good question. There was a time when users could drag and drop images into tiny MCE and it would store them in the database, in which case our database started to swell. But I think when I download our database compressed with GZ, it is about 17 megabytes. That is 7 years of data for 300 kids, just over 300 kids.
So, Tom,
So it's 70 or 17?
70.
the Tripod Yao is about 300
Already?
Yeah.
Okay.
megs, gigs. It's
Gigs.
big.
Oh,
It's very big.
okay.
Gigs.
But
Yes.
they're through trained schools, so that's
Yeah.
Yes.
a lot
That's
bigger.
a lot of data.
Yeah. I can't imagine their
I think
database would be 300 gigs already. That would be a serious
Let me see if I
issue.
can find
Okay.
it.
Of course, then you've got, as well as your database, you've got your file system. So then that depends on how much you let people upload. So in Apache, you can set a limit. I think it's 2 megabytes by default. At school, we've increased it to 64 megabytes, so kids can upload short videos and things like that, and staff can as well. So it just depends on what features you're using and how often people are uploading and all sorts of things. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to commercial support.
It's megs. It's about,
Okay.
about 250 megs.
Okay. That's uncompressed though,
Uncompressed.
but that's after a year of use. But it's a big school. That's
That's
about
after-
yeah. It's about, sounds about right. Yeah. Yeah. The size of your database is never really that much of a problem until you try and migrate. If you've got a really big database, then migration can become problematic. But I can't imagine getting into those sorts of figures. So commercial support is slowly starting to become available for Gibbon through a number of providers who have various offerings depending on what you need. The hope long term is that there's a set of people who are willing to help people in any country with any kind of given problem, from hosting to ongoing support to building custom modules and things like that. So at the moment, if you have a look on our support page, you'll see 3 different companies. Andy, who's sitting on my left, is Rapid36. He's the top spot as he was first in the door. I think he saw Gibbon at version 1.0.
You can see the potential.
Yeah, I had to work really hard to convince him that I wasn't insane. If you are interested, this is what Gibbon version 1 looked like when it went out the door. Hasn't changed. Usually other than aesthetically.
That white box hasn't changed at all.
Yeah. So when I showed this to Andy, I could see him thinking, I'm not sure this is going anywhere. Anyway, he stuck with us. Titus Learning are a UK-based company. So Andy is a former international school teacher and has spent a lot of time building different systems, and has ported some of his assessment systems and also his parent-teacher conference booking system. And he's also done a free reporting system and a free housepoint system. So those are available, and he will also offer you support through a number of different problems or areas of interest in Gibbon. Titus Learning are UK-based and have a lot of experience with Moodle, and are just moving into Gibbon and working out how Gibbon can support what they do with Moodle, and they're interested in meeting potential customers. And then Xcobeen is a guy called James Peru in Kenya, and as far as I can tell, he's mostly offering solutions to other people in Kenya, but you could always try and contact him as well. Hopefully, longer term, this list will grow and there will be more offerings, because one of the problems that most of us have experienced in school is that people will say, well, it's open source, it's free. What do we do if something goes wrong? Who can we blame? Who is responsible? And it takes a certain type of school leader to trust that you, as the technology director or IT coordinator, can make this thing work without a company behind it. And so that can be a problem. And often with open source, it comes down to philosophical reasoning as well. So my school were happy to go with open source and build open source because I was able to sell the philosophy as something that worked really well with education. So, well, do we want to be spending lots of money that we could put elsewhere and giving it to a company who has no interest in our educational agenda? They are a corporate entity, or do we want to be part of a community of people who are interested in education? So the leadership were amenable to that. But I know speaking to a lot of people in bigger schools, they'll say, I'd love to use it, but there's no way I can do it. So one of the things that wider commercial support will get us as a community is the ability to sign a contract with someone to get the guarantee that someone in your school wants. Andy, is there anything you want to say, a sales pitch at this point?
No, I don't need to do a sales pitch.
Okay. The work speaks for itself. In terms of the relationship of the Gibbon project to commercial offerings, at the moment Gibbon doesn't have a legal entity behind it, but I've been speaking to some different lawyers and I'm trying to work out a way to get the legal advice we need as a project that has no revenue stream in order to get some kind of non-profit based company so that we can start fundraising, and then with that fundraising we can then engage in more advocacy and get the word out about Gibbon. So that sort of relates to the corporate side of things. So I'm hoping within the next 6 months we'll have a defined legal entity and the ability to take donations, which would be nice because there's always things like pizza that we want to spend money on. Okay. We've got about 10 minutes left in this session. I think almost everyone in this session is due to be in the next session as well, which is Gibbon and curriculum, which is probably going to turn into quite a long one. So is there anyone online or here in the room that has any questions about servers, commercial support?